Welcome to the session for Accelerate .NET Porting from Windows to Linux with Amazon Q Developer. My name is Murtaza Chaudhry. I lead product management in the AWS migration and modernization team. And my team has been building generative AI capabilities, which are launched as transformation capabilities in Amazon Q Developer, which we're going to talk about now. And today, I'm joined by two of my esteemed colleagues who you will meet in a bit. Ravi Prasad Momidi, he's a principal engineer. He is also the architect of the capabilities that we're presenting here today. And along with us, we have Nits Jagannathan. He's the product lead. So what are we going to cover today is why make .NET applications Linux ready. We're going to talk about the journey of taking the applications in terms of moving from .NET Framework to cross-platform .NET, how customers think of that, what the challenges are there, and then we will talk about the capabilities of Amazon Q Developer, particularly the transformation capabilities for .NET that can help meet the business objectives that you have in terms of porting .NET code and making them Linux ready to run on Linux instances, containers, or serverless. We have multiple demos here, and we'll do a walkthrough of the capabilities along with sharing some of the things that have gone behind in building these features, how we have leveraged generative AI, how we have leveraged LLM, and our thinking behind it. First off, I want to tell you that at AWS, we have been running Microsoft workloads since 2008. Customers have been successfully running their workloads and growing their businesses. However, we hear from customers that they want to move away from licensed software. They want to move to open source. And there are several reasons for that. First and foremost is licensing savings in terms of costs. They can receive up to 40% licensing savings when they move away from Windows to Linux. Second is the performance benefits. Running Linux is 1.5 to 2x faster than running on Windows. And think about the maintenance, the operational overhead, and the patching, and all the things that you have to do when you're running on Windows. All of that goes away once you move to Linux. And the next thing that customers look at is scalability. So if you think of transformation as a whole, once you move your applications and make them Linux ready, you want to break monoliths to microservices. You want to make them as scalable as possible and gain advantages in terms of developer productivity and rapid innovation to grow your businesses. And with these, we have seen even more urgency from customers to move from Windows to Linux. Customers, we have seen, have reduced their Windows usage by over 70% to adopt Linux. And this journey, if you think of it, transformation can be thought of in different ways. You can re-architect your applications, you can rewrite your applications, you can redesign your applications. But to take the advantages of open source and Linux as soon as possible, there is an easy way, or there's a shorter path, which is porting. Porting from .NET Framework to cross-platform .NET. First of all, when you do that, it is cross-platform. You can choose your deployment methodology depending on what suits best for your applications. Secondly, you get higher performance. You get the operational load goes away, performance increases. You can move to microservices architecture easily, and you get the support of the community. Cross-platform .NET is supported by the community, huge user group supporting it. And the cost effectiveness that you see there, customers tell us that they look for funds to invest for their next big thing, for the next thing that they want to build. And the 40% savings that you can receive out of this transformation journey can help you fund your next innovation and grow your application. Also think of it, you have teams. You may have teams who are skilled more at the newer technologies, at the newer stuff. And you have these legacy applications running for which you know it needs to be done. You need to transform, but you never get the time. Like, I need to do it, but I'm not getting the time. And that's where we have been hearing from customers who have been telling us that, hey, help us solve this. Help us solve this in a way that we have to spend as less a time as possible. I want to walk you through what the typical journey is, the .NET porting process. When customers get started, they start by analyzing their code. They analyze their code to see what type of code bases do they have, what type of project types do they have, what kind of incompatibilities do they have. And they may do it manually, or they may run some kind of linting tools. And once they have figured it out, they would start the porting journey. They would transform the code, which also is a manual process up until now. And then once it's ported, then figuring out the organizational readiness, validation, testing, any kind of verification in terms of security, resiliency, and then deploying and then running the workloads in the chosen target. And there are other complexities as well in terms of which is the right target, where do I run, which workloads do I have. There are many legwork that happens before, in between, and after. And think of an enterprise setting where a portfolio comprises of hundreds of applications. And this journey has to be repeated for them. And you know what is added complexity there? The dependencies. If you have a large portfolio of applications, there may be gnarly dependencies with some applications depending on some, which influences the priority and the order in which you need to transform. And we have seen from customers that there are usually large business units, large number of departments, and a central IT team or a DevOps team who is leading this initiative across the organization. They have to coordinate across the teams. First to get the buy-in, first to have everyone agree that yes, we start the transformation journey, and then start this labor-intensive process because it is all manual. And you can imagine it's error-prone as well because it's highly dependent on how skilled the people are. And in a large setting, imagine the amount of collaboration that's needed. Imagine the collaboration needed, especially when there are dependencies involved, which makes it a very hard and slow process. So in our keynote, Matt Garman announced Amazon Q developers transformation capabilities for .NET. So how we think of, I want to share some things of how we think of them. And then we will show you the product in action. There are many capabilities here, but we think of this as a centralized experience to meet all your migration and modernization needs. Key things are, we have trained this service on the years of experience of doing migration and modernization. We have built foundational LLMs, foundational large language models. We have built domain expert AI agents. And the way we think of it is, we think of this as something that will augment your teams. There'll be an extension of your team, and you will receive a domain expert with AI agents who will provide you the expertise that you need with your supervision. If you have organizational processes, you have standards to adhere to, you can supervise. You can supervise these capabilities and provide your preferences. With that, we'll go deeper, and I'd like to invite Ravi Prasad Momidi on stage, who will walk you through some of the capabilities on IDE, and then talk about what is underlying as well.
Thank you, Murtaza. Now let's see the Q.NET agent in action. So I took the liberty to pre-record the demo using a video. I wanted to save ourselves trouble. So I'm just going to run through the video demo. So here what you're seeing is Visual Studio. It is loaded with an open source .NET Framework shopping cart application called Bob's Bookstore. I've also loaded the Visual Studio extension for Q Developer. And so when I'm going to go ahead and right-click on a project in the Solutions Explorer, you'll actually see a new option pops up, which is port the project with Amazon Q Developer. When I'm going to click on that, it's going to show me a dialog box. And in the dialog box, I can actually go choose the version of .NET that I want to port to. In this case, it's .NET 8. It also gives me an option to be able to go ahead and keep my .NET standard projects intact for backwards compatibility or port them to the new versions of .NET as well. So in this case, I'm just going to choose both, right? Because I want to make sure that all my projects have to be in .NET 8. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on the port .NET standard projects to .NET and start. What you're seeing here is that Q has identified that in order for it to transform the bookstore.web project, it also requires 3 more projects, the bookstore.common, the bookstore.data, and the bookstore.domain projects as well. So once it's identified this, it's going to start working on the application itself. Make a note of this name there, which says bookstore.web code group. We'll talk about it in a bit. So as the transformation process gets underway, we can actually see the progress that's happening. So I'm going to open up the output window from the usual build output to Amazon Q language client, where I can see a little bit more progress of what's happening. So as the transformation process progresses, we'll actually see various changes happening. One thing you'll actually notice is that the Q transformation is in progress bar notification which showed up. What it basically talks about is that Q transformation can now happen behind the scenes. You don't have to keep your Visual Studio window open anymore. The Q transformation can take varied amounts of time depending on the size of the project, so you don't have to keep it open all the time. But in this case, I mean, it's a demo, so I'm just going to keep it open, and we can actually see what actually happens as Q progresses. So you'll actually see the different steps that Q is actually doing behind the scenes. It's transforming the different projects. You'll actually start seeing the steps, and you'll actually see some progress going on as well. If you see on the right side, they actually tell you on a per project basis how much progress it's making as well, right? And then finally, when it's done with transforming the projects, it's generating the transformation summary and downloading the results and generating the code diffs as well. Next, I actually want to go ahead and look at what actually happened as part of the transformation process. So I'm just going to take a few of these notifications out to make myself some room. So let me close some of these notification bars there. Okay, so once I've closed the notification bar, I'm going to click on the View Code Transformation Summary. So let me open this up, and you'll actually see what Q did. So Q actually shows here the different projects it actually ended up transforming. It gives you an overview of the number of files changed, the packages that were updated, and APIs changed as well. I am not happy with just this overview, so I'm just going to go and look into more detail of what actual code changed. Right? So I'm just going to go ahead and click the View Diffs button on the top. So when I'm going to go click on the View Diffs button, you'll actually start seeing what code changes Q actually did. First, Q will actually show us the list of files that were both added or modified. In this case, as you can see, Q actually added a couple of files. So let's pick up one of the files to look at, and this is our program.cs file. This file is actually required for the application to be functional in the new version of .NET. So Q automatically generated this file and deemed it's necessary for this application to work in the new version of .NET. So now that we've looked at the new file, I also want to look at what code changes were made to existing files. So I'm going to pick one more file here and go look at what changes were there before and what's changed too. So let me pick this authentication controller.cs file, and you'll actually see this in a side-by-side diff view, where on the left-hand side you're seeing the .NET framework code, on the right side you're seeing the .NET transformed code. So as you can see here, Q determined that the system.web and the system.web.mvc is no longer compatible with the new version of .NET. It went ahead and replaced it. There are other modifications in this file as well. So you can actually go ahead and look at each of these modifications and determine if you're happy with it, right? And in this case, I'm happy with it, so I'm just going to close this. And when I close this one, I have an option to apply the diffs. So I can either go ahead and pick files here on which code changes I want to apply selectively, or I can go ahead and select everything and apply the diffs. When I apply the diffs, what happens is that this changes get committed only to the local version of the code that has been checked out into Visual Studio. So Visual Studio will actually go ahead and determine that the local copy has changed, so now it's going to reload the file. So once it's reloaded the file, let's make sure that it's actually done it right. So I'm going to go ahead and reload the files and go ahead and pick up a new file to go look at, right? We already saw the authentication controller, now let's pick the home controller. So as you can see, this is the file which has been modified. It works with the new version of .NET. Okay. So now that you're actually seeing Q in action, let's dive in to understand what went behind the scenes, right? So Q being a goal-seeking agent, it identified that in order for it to go ahead and transform the bookstore.web project, it also required 3 other projects: the bookstore.domain, the bookstore.data, and the bookstore.common projects. So it does this by forming what's called code groups. Remember I told you that make note of this bookstore.web code group? That's what it did. It basically created a code group which actually had 3 other projects as dependencies. In this case, it was a direct dependency where you had the bookstore.web depending on the other projects. Q also has sophistications to be able to understand other patterns, such as you have a nested dependency or a combination of both. So once Q has actually identified the various projects and the code groups, it starts working on the different parts of the application. So it starts working on the .NET Framework startup configuration, web.config, and it basically goes ahead and generates the .NET middleware code that actually makes this application functional in the new version of .NET. Similarly, it goes ahead and transforms the business logic and the unit tests which are accompanying the business logic to be able to get transformed to the new versions of .NET. And Q does this through an analyze, modify, and verify loop, what we call as a tri-stage process. So let's dive into a little bit more detail of what this analyze, modify, verify tri-state process looks like. So when Q actually picks up a piece of .NET Framework code block, it first analyzes the code for what we call as incompatibilities. So what is an incompatibility? An incompatibility refers to either one or more lines of code which do not work as is in the newer versions of .NET. So Q goes ahead and identifies and generates replacement code for it to work in new versions of .NET. By using a curated .NET porting knowledge base, it is able to go generate a new version of code, and then it can go apply this code modifications. Once it applies the code modifications, it goes through a verification process. And 2 outcomes can come out of the verification process, right? Either the code comes out clean, right? The verification is clean and everything is good. So we reach our target or the goal of getting the code transformed into the new versions of .NET. Or the verification fails, in which case you have to start again, right? Where you have to go identify and generate replacement code, yet another set of it, right? And go apply this process again and again. So we call this capability of our Q.NET agent the self-debugging capability. So now that we can see how the code gets transformed, we wanted to know how we can evaluate the entire transformation process. So we set ourselves to come up with building block for evaluation criteria of how we can evaluate the entire transformation process. So we came up with 2 things, right? First thing is, can Q successfully port a line of code with incompatibility? The second one is, given the non-deterministic nature of Gen AI, how consistently can Q repeat this success? So with these two evaluation criteria as building blocks, we set out to build an evaluation system. So the evaluation system basically started out small, right? We picked a few projects to begin with, and we checked for syntax errors on the modified code. And then as we started ramping up, we actually started broadening our set, right? And we included various different types of .NET Framework projects. For example, we started with class libraries, then expanded to console, applications, MVC, web API, and WCF as well. Once we felt comfortable that we are able to go ahead and help the code get transformed from the .NET Framework to new versions of .NET, we worked closely with our design partner customers to be able to validate this system against thousands of projects. So here is a brief overview of what's supported in the current preview version of the Q Transform for .NET. So we already covered the various project types. The source versions and the target versions that we support right now is what you see here. So one may be wondering that, okay, now I've converted or transformed successfully my one .NET application, but I have hundreds, sometimes even more, of .NET applications. Do I have to go to a source code repository, check each one out, go load in Visual Studio, and go ahead and run through this transformation one at a time? Or is there a better way? Well, you probably guessed it, right? There is always a better way. And to talk about it, of how you can actually port your .NET applications at scale, let me invite Nitz to the stage. And thank you. You too.
Thanks, Ravi. So, as you saw, it is quite powerful, the capabilities that is available at developers' hands for porting applications from .NET Framework to .NET 8. But does it work for all the customers? As Ravi mentioned, we have talked to customers who said, we have hundreds of applications. We don't want to assign dedicated developers' time to actually be able to transform one application at a time. Is there something that you can do where you can start from our source code repo, take it, analyze the code, identify the project types, the dependencies, transform all the things that you can transform, and allow us to supervise and guide the transformation where we possibly can. And once it is done, commit back to a same source code repo under a new branch. Then the humans or the developers can come in and they can review the code and they can take the next step of action in terms of merging and deploying the way they feel like. And one of the things that we want, also they give feedback is that in order for them to do that, they also want to change the user persona who's going to be able to handle that. Instead of assigning developers, they were thinking, what about DevOps? What about IT admins? What about IT leaders who want to initiate these actions? And have the developers come in where that is needed and work with dedicated teams depending on the application they choose. And just like what Ravi did, I also had taken the liberty of recording a demo, but I will annotate the demo so that you understand the experience that it goes through. Okay. Okay. So in this case, first we go into the Q. The experience originates here in the web console instead of Visual Studio IDE. So you start here, and first you go on. You provide your credentials. That takes you to a workspace. And think of this as your container for all your porting jobs. So you could have one job, you could have hundreds of jobs, and for specific applications that you might want to pick from repository. So you come here, and this is your workspace. You do what you like. First thing you might want to do is rename it to something that you would want. And then after that, you might want to say, Q, create a job for me. And at this point, you have not given access to anything. It is purely having an interaction with Q, providing objectives, identifying what you want to do, and getting to know what the system is about. So we ask Q to create a job, and it opens up a chat window, and you are, as was announced during Matt's keynote, There are 3 use cases that we support. .NET modernization is one of them, but we also have VMware modernization as well as like mainframe. So in this case, for this particular audience, we are picking the .NET. And you are again given options to verify what exactly you want. And we are picking option number 1. And this is something that Q is automatically doing on your behalf. It is setting the job type, the objective that you want to do, and like setting a default project name so that you don't actually have to go in and like change everything in order for you to get started. But you always have the option to customize all of this once we get started with this job as well. So you start it, you will be given an option to create a job. So this is what we call as the job plan. What Amazon Q developer has done is it has created a sequence of steps, a high-level trajectory for you to flow. Like going back to what Ravi was demonstrating in the Visual Studio IDE, you had these same steps, but that was for a single application. Here we are just abstracting it away at like a large scale, transformation. So you can essentially like start with your source code repo. So the first thing you are going to be doing is connecting your source code repos to Amazon Q developer. So in order to do that, you start with the AWS account, and what we call here is a code connector. So AWS Code Connector is an existing service that allows interactions and connections to existing source controls like GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, etc. For this particular release, we are supporting GitHub connections. So you can follow the instructions to set up your own GitHub connector with code connections. And once you get your resource number, you come in and and establish this link here. And this allows us to scale and allows us to integrate with your existing mechanisms for interacting with your source code repo. Okay? So once the connection is set up, you are provided a copy verification link. So what is this step that is very important is that Amazon Q does not want to directly take, there you go. Amazon Q does not want to directly take access into your source code repo and start taking actions. We want to make sure that we have the right level of access and the right repositories and the account. So what we have is an admin who has to go review this and approve it in the Amazon Q developer before Q will actually go and access your repositories. Okay? So now the admin has approved it. So going back here, now you see that the connector has been approved. So this is the point where Amazon Q developer has certainty that admin has approved the connection, and we can start going and assessing your repositories to identify how many repos are there, how many project types are there, and then still allowing you to review what's happening. Okay? So you begin this process by sending it to Q. The queue automatically starts the discovery, and as you see here, there is a work log item that is saying who was the user that started this action and what input they provided, and you can use that as a mechanism to trace back what actions were done as well. Okay? So Amazon Q has started the discovery, and it has identified a list of repositories in your GitHub account. At this point, you could say, yeah, I want to transform all of this. You are very well welcome to do so. But if you say, no, I don't want all of this. I want to be able to select only specific repositories that I want to select. Then you have the option of selecting either, individual ones. So in this case, I'm selecting multiple of them. Before sending it to Q. So one other aspect is that in this particular scenario, within this Q developer environment, I am the admin, so there is no verification required. But if you are just a contributor persona within here, even after you select the repos, the request goes to the admin for them to review what repos were selected for transformation, and we will, only after that, Q will start the transformation process. Why is that important? Because the Q transformation is actually acting in bulk. So we want to make sure that we don't want to transform things that we are not allowed to do. Having that human supervision and guidance is one of the ways we are able to achieve, essentially like delivering what you want to do. All right? So in this case, we have started the transformation, and the work log is updating. And you will start seeing the transformation happening. And as you can see, like, the work log starts updating as we go through. It says, like, I started with 0 lines, 1,000 lines, 6,000 lines. So you can continue to track what's happening there. But you don't always have to do that through work log. So we have a dashboard that will start showing, the information of what's the current status of all these bulk transformation happening simultaneously. In this case, you can imagine there could be like hundreds of repositories that we are transforming with supported project types. So you might want to look at specific each one of them and see what happened within them, whether they are fully transformed, they are partially transformed, if there are any failures that we need to deal with. And you can click on each one of them and see what happened here. Here you can say the .NET version was 6. The lines of code that were identified were 1,000, and then how many we actually transformed. We may have deleted some, we may have added some. And this is quite important because these could be like long-running jobs. And a customer or like an IT admin may not be sitting in front of the console all the time. So when you're coming back, either you look through the work logs, or you could actually like look at this dashboard to identify the progress. And you can always download it, export it, things like that. Okay? And one final thing, just to also verify that after the transformation is completed, we said we will create a new branch. That is the target branch destination, and we'll commit the code into the GitHub repository for you to go review. So I want to show you how that will look like as well. Okay. In this case, I have already opened it. So this is my GitHub account. I go to my repositories. And there are multiple branches here. You can go select the branch that we said we will copy into the D05 branch. And you can see there was a one commit that happened. And you can see Q had committed this particular change and what change that has happened. The same thing that you see in Visual Studio. You have an option to look at this in bulk. But this also means you can clone this particular branch into your local environment. And then you can do the same thing what you did with the Visual Studio IDE as well. So here you go. So in this case, like Q has committed that. And in this file, you would see that this is net 6.0. And essentially, it has been updated to net 8, and that's the change. And similarly, for the CS project, it started with net 6, and now it has updated it to net 8. So these are all the changes that Q does by default, and you can verify it, whether you can merge it in, run it your own build system, CI/CD pipelines. It's totally up to you. Okay. All right. So that was that demo. So just to double click on, like why is there a need for like a dashboard and work logs, right? Amazon Q does a lot of things on your behalf. And as I mentioned, like customers may not be sitting all the time in front of the web console to figure out what happened for these long-running jobs. So in order to identify that, so they have two main avenues, right? So work log is basically equivalent to your CloudTrail. You see all the steps that happen, the sequential things that happen, which user did what timeline each of them happened, just to kind of give you two things: proof of value, and second one is also like an audit trail for you to figure out what happened and debug issues. And then if you want a high-level overview of what's happening overall, is it ready to intervene, or is it completed, you can look at the dashboard and view the current status of the projects as a whole. And with that being said, I will hand over to Murtaza to bring it home. Thank you.
So I want to first thank Nits and Ravi for the wonderful demos. What you saw in the last two demos are two experiences that you can leverage. Imagine the organization setting that we talked about earlier. There is a central IT team or a DevOps admin who is leading this initiative, to transform the .NET applications from Windows to Linux. And there are business units, application teams, with developers ingrained in them. So the two experiences that we talked about, they can be used by the different personas. If you are an IT admin or a DevOps admin, you can connect Amazon Q developers' transformation capabilities for .NET directly to your source code repository and start porting your applications. And if you are a developer, part of the application team, then you can use the Visual Studio IDE extension. So the underlying capability, the large language models, the methodology, it shares a common fabric across the two to provide you similar results. One works on one application, projects, or solution at a time. The other works at a large scale. With the web experience, you can port hundreds of applications together. And all of this goes through the same journey. You saw in the demos, it analyzes the code. It starts the transformation. And what's most important there is the human supervision aspect of it. And at any time, you have control and visibility through the dashboards and the work log. If you have compliance obligation and if you need to show an audit trail, you can leverage the work log for a detailed view of what has happened. And as your journey is progressing, you can use the dashboard to see where you are. What's your progress? While all these things are happening, we have carefully designed the system such that it can integrate very well with your team. And so, human supervision and guardrails are a critical aspect of AI and how you onboard them to your team. So some of the things that we have carefully designed are the level of control that you have to review, adjust, approve, and make changes as things progresses. So if you think back about the demos that you saw, when we connected the connector to your source code repository, you had an opportunity there to select branches. And then it kicked off an approval flow. So imagine if you had multiple team members who are working, one who is doing the selection, one who is reviewing and approving. Those scenarios are enabled, are allowed in the system, and an audit trail is maintained as well of how that approval and selection has happened. In addition to that, as transformation progresses, at any time, if it needs any input, it provides you notifications. You'll receive notification within the application, and you can take action. If you go back to the Visual Studio demo, you have the opportunity to accept, to look at the difference between what your original code was and what your transformed code was. And similarly, you can do it at that scale as well within your GitHub repository. So I want to bring us back to how this can help you. From our tests and the benchmarks that we have run, we have seen that you can receive up to 4x acceleration in speed. And you can massively parallelize the porting process with hundreds of applications porting together. You receive at-scale visibility. The human supervision is an important aspect. And after the porting process is complete, remember the licensing cost-saving benefits that we talked about earlier. The 40% licensing cost benefits once you move to Linux-ready applications. As we have built this product, we have worked with several customers who have been our design partners, and they have been early adopters of the product. And they have been super excited to see the results, provide us feedback, and work with us in this process. So I want to share a few quotes from some of our customers. First one is from Signature It Group. They're a European digital secure digital transactions company. They have been using Amazon Q developer transformation capabilities to port their .NET applications, and they have received the acceleration benefits that we have talked about. The other company is Cockroach Labs Database. They're an industry leader in offering distributed SQL Server DB with compatible SQL Server features. So they have been using our product as well. So with that, I would like to recap what we have covered today. First is, we saw how customers are moving away from Windows to Linux, and how porting .NET applications is accelerating that journey, and the products that we are offering here, where you can do this at scale using the web experience. And if you're an application team, you can do that using the Visual Studio IDE extension. And all of it works with you having full control, with you supervising how it's happening, and you taking your applications from Windows to Linux to receive the benefits of cost optimization and then innovating further from there. I'd like to invite you to welcome Amazon Q Developer to your teams, to be that domain-specific AI agent that augments your team and help you transform your .NET applications faster to go from Windows to Linux, and so that you can innovate faster, grow your businesses faster, and scale and receive the scalability benefits as well as all the performance needs that your applications have. I want to talk about another session where you can take it for a spin within a workshop. We are conducting a workshop that's tomorrow at noon. If you want to try it out, there are use cases, there are scenarios that they will present. You can do a walkthrough with the team. Some of our team members are there. You can talk to them as well. And we'd like to hear from you what you think about the product. With that, I'd like to welcome back Ravi and Nitz. And we thank you for joining us today, this afternoon, for this session.
Thank you.